GoForThe2.com in with the Week 4 predictions. Let's jump right into it. We'll start in the Big 12 with a couple of ball games. Oklahoma State at home against Texas Tech. This is an Oklahoma State team that's coming off a 44-21 home win over Brett Rippon and Boise State. They dominated on both sides of the football. Cornelius stepped up. Justice Hill stepped up, but more importantly, the front seven of Oklahoma State stepped up and held Boise State in check to only 38 rushing yards in that battle last week in Stillwater. This is an Oklahoma State team that has dominated Texas Tech in recent years. They've won 9 straight over the Red Raiders. They've won the last 5 by 10.6 points per game. Picked up this victory in Lubbock last year, 41-34. I think the matchup that you want to see play out is you're talking about Oklahoma State's offense that's averaging 331 passing yards per game and more importantly 258 rushing yards on the ground, going up against Texas Tech's defense that's giving up 454 passing yards to opposing offenses. Look for Cornelius to have a big day, but more importantly, look for Oklahoma State's defense that's only given up 74 rushing yards per game to force Texas Tech's offense into long third down situations. And to me, that's the difference. I do feel that Oklahoma State is the more dominant team in this ballgame, and they win back-to-back home games in dominating fashion, calling for the 55-28 win over Texas Tech in this matchup. I think Oklahoma State could be a possible Big 12 contender for the conference, but more importantly, a possible playoff dark horse should they knock off Oklahoma and Texas later in the year. So keep an eye out for Oklahoma State and Mike Gundy. Think they have the better head coach in this matchup going up against Cliff Kingsbury and Texas Tech in this ballgame. Let's keep it in the Big 12. TCU and Texas. TCU has dominated the Longhorns and have won 4 of the last 5 by 30 points per game. They picked up this victory last year in Fort Worth, 24-7. This is a TCU team that started fast last week in Arlington, did hold a 21-13 lead in the third quarter over Ohio State before Dwayne Haskins and J.K. Dobbins led the comeback. They lost that matchup 40-28, allowed over 500 yards of total offense to the Buckeyes. They did rush for over 200 yards in that matchup, but more importantly, now go on the road to face a very solid defensive front seven in Texas. Texas last week started slow. They fell behind 14-3 to USC before they took the 16-14 halftime lead. They turned it on for the 37-14 win over USC and JT Daniels. They held USC to -5 rushing yards in that ballgame, forced long third down situations, and I think that's the matchup you're going to watch play out going up against TCU quarterback Sean Robinson. You're talking about a Texas defense that's only allowing 109 rushing yards per game, and more importantly, 31% on third down conversions. The way you have to attack Texas is over the top. They're giving up over 200 passing yards per game. And you look at Sean Robinson in the second half of last week's matchup, inconsistent in that ballgame going up against Ohio State's defense. The matchup, I think, is Sam Ehlinger as well. Sam Ehlinger completed 57% of his passes, 723 yards, 6 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. I think the wide receivers are the difference, and more importantly, really like the way the offensive line opened up holes against a physical, in my opinion, USC defense, an athletic defense that can run sideline to sideline. TCU's a bit undersized on the front seven, and more importantly, got beat up by a bigger offensive line in Ohio State last week. Now go on the road to Austin. I like Texas here. I think Texas is gelling at just the right time. They're able to run the football. They're averaging 181 rushing yards per game, passing right in the area of about 254 yards through the air. Tom Herman's feels the pressures. He's on the hot seat. He stepped it up last week against USC. He steps it up again this coming Saturday, gets the upset win over TCU, 34-24. Texas strikes the home upset over the Horned Frogs this coming weekend. Another intriguing battle, Notre Dame on the road to face Wake Forest. Notre Dame has not looked good in recent weeks in back-to-back games against Vanderbilt and more importantly, Ball State 2 weeks ago. They struggled to win that ball game against Kyle Shermer last week. Now go on the road to face a Wake Forest team that does have 2 extra days of preparation after their 34-27 loss to Boston College about a week and a half ago. You look at this matchup last year, Notre Dame rushed the football for 380 yards and 4 rushing touchdowns in the 48-37 win over the Demon Deacons. They now go on the road to Winston-Salem, where Wake Forest has played traditionally very tough against some of the better teams within the conference. Teams like Louisville, teams like Boston College. You can mention it. They've stepped up in recent years. Florida State, they pushed to the limit in Winston-Salem. But I still feel this is a tough matchup for Wake Forest in this ballgame. They got beat up by a bigger physical offensive line, in Boston College allowed 220 rushing yards to A.J. Dillon and that offense for Boston College. And more importantly, this is an offensive line that did get it going in Notre Dame last week, rushed the football for 230 rushing yards plus in that win over Vanderbilt. This is a Notre Dame offense that's rushing for 166 yards on the ground. Look for Brandon Wimbush to have a big day. That's the difference to me. Offense and defensive lines of Notre Dame going up against a smaller offense and defensive line of Wake Forest. Hartman's played well, but he still is only a freshman. If Hinton does come back for this ball game, he hasn't played. Is he rusty? That's the concern I have for Wake Forest. Think the better team here with the better quarterback in terms of being a dual threat is Brandon Wimbush and Notre Dame. Even though Stanford's on deck, Notre Dame does pick up a convincing 37-20 win over Wake Forest on the road this coming Saturday. Another intriguing battle is in the ACC. It's Clemson, it's Georgia Tech. Clemson last week struggled early on with Georgia Southern. They won that ball game. Now go on the road to face Georgia Tech that they've dominated in recent years. They've won 4 of the last 5 by 19 points per game. You look at Georgia Tech, they struggled last week on the road to Pittsburgh, lost that matchup by a score of 21-18. They now are at home, a lot of pressure on Paul Johnson, and more importantly, a top-ranked team comes to Atlanta and Bobby Dodd Stadium. This is a Clemson team now that's rushing for 226 yards on the ground. They're also passing for over 200 yards through the air with Kelly Bryant and Trevor Lawrence, and have one of the most dominant defensive fronts in college football, only giving up 114 rushing yards per game. That's the recipe to beat the triple option. You have to stuff running lanes to disrupt the zone blocking of the triple option, and that's what Clemson possesses. But I still like Georgia Tech here to keep this game close. This is a Georgia Tech team that's averaging 392 rushing yards on the ground. They're converting 40% on third down conversions and allowing opposing offenses to convert 45% of their third down opportunities. I think if they could start the game with a long, sustained drive and get points, they'll be in this ballgame from start to finish. Last year, they struggled. They lost that matchup 24-10. It was in a wet track in Death Valley before the speed of Clemson took over. If Clemson jumps up early, it'll be a long day for Georgia Tech to play from behind, but I still like Georgia Tech here. I think they slow the game down. If Trevor Lawrence does start, that could be an MO as well in terms of forcing the game on a young freshman quarterback on the road with the conference game. I like Clemson to win, but I think Georgia Tech keeps this game very, very close. Clemson picks up a 28-21 victory over Georgia Tech this coming weekend. Expect the Yellow Jackets to be in this game from start to finish. Another ACC game, Louisville on the road to Virginia. I liked Virginia last week over Ohio. They did not disappoint. Got a dominant 14-point win over Ohio in that matchup. This is a team in Virginia that's averaging over 200 yards per game, and more importantly, a Louisville team that's struggling on the offensive side of the ball. They're only averaging 198 passing yards per game and only 162 rushing yards on the ground. This was an offense last year with Lamar Jackson that averaged 245 yards on the ground and 299 through the air. Jawan Pass has struggled. Look for Cunningham to get the start in this ball game, but I expect Louisville to bounce back in a big way. Throw the statistics out of this matchup. It's Bobby Petrino, it's a conference game, and more importantly, I think it's the speed on the outside of Louisville's wide receivers that are the difference. Virginia has struggled when teams stretch them vertically. Indiana couldn't do it because they don't have the speed on the outside, and Ohio couldn't do it either. They're a more methodical type of team, even though Nathan Rourke was a solid quarterback and Maxwell as well. They did not have the speed to challenge Virginia vertically. Louisville does. Whether Cunningham starts or Juwan Pass starts, it doesn't matter. It's the wide receivers of Louisville that, to me, are the difference. Expect the Cardinals to break out, put the pressure on Virginia's offense to match them score for score, and I think the Cardinals strike the upset here. I think it's high scoring, 34-21. Louisville gets the road upset win over the Cavaliers this coming weekend. Another intriguing battle is Georgia and Missouri. This is a Georgia team that has dominated the Tigers in recent years. Georgia's won 5 straight over Missouri by 15.6 points per game. It's a Georgia team that dominated Missouri last year 53-28, but Drew Lock had great success against that Georgia secondary in Athens last year. He completed 15 of 25 passes, 253 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception in that loss. You're talking about Drew Lock that's averaging, this is an offense in Missouri that's averaging 389 passing yards per game against opposing offenses. And more importantly, Drew Lock has his completion percentage up. He's completing 69% of his passes, 1,062 yards, 11 touchdowns, 1 interception. More importantly, you look at the strength of Missouri's defense. They're only giving up 74 rushing yards per game, going up against Georgia's offense that's averaging 272 yards on the ground. That's the matchup I think you watch play out in Columbia this coming weekend. Look for Drew Lock and Missouri to start fast and put the pressure on Jake Fromm and that offense to match them score for score. Jake Fromm has stepped up. He's completing 80% of his passes, 479 yards, 6 touchdowns, 1 interception. But more importantly, can he match Drew Lock if Missouri jumps up early in terms of passing each and every down to come from behind? Now, I know Georgia has the physicality on the offense and defensive lines, but Missouri has the speed on the outside and the better pure passer in this ballgame. I think Missouri's in this ballgame from start to finish. I think Georgia wins, but I do feel it's very close. I feel Georgia picks up a 34-30 win on the road in Columbia against Missouri. Look for Roundtree, look for Crockett to move the football, and more importantly, you look at Georgia's secondary. They're only giving up 157 passing yards per game, but to date, haven't faced a wide-open attack like Missouri. I know they faced Middle Tennessee State. They faced South Carolina. But Drew Lock and the speed of Missouri on the outside is different than both of those teams. To me, that's the difference. Really like the way the defense is playing in terms of front seven play by Missouri. And I think Missouri pushes Georgia to the limit this coming weekend. Let's keep it in the Pac-12, a very intriguing battle. It's Arizona State and Herm Edwards go on the road to face Jake Browning in Washington. Tale of 2 teams here. You look at the series overall. Since 2013, Arizona's dominated Washington. They've won 4 of the last 5 by 14.6 points per game. Got this victory 13-7 last year in Tempe. You're talking about a team last week in Arizona State that struggled on the road to San Diego State. San Diego State picked up the 28-21 victory, but more importantly, was able to rush the football for 311 yards on that Arizona State defense. On the flip side, Washington stepped up. They held Huntley and Utah in check for the 21-7 win on the road in Salt Lake City during a blackout. You look at Browning and you look at Manny Wilkins. Both of these offenses are going to look to challenge both defenses vertically. Look for Manny Wilkins and this offense. They're averaging right in the area of about 319 yards per game, only averaging about 124 rushing yards on the ground to go up against Washington's secondary that's holding opposing offenses to 190 passing yards per game. And more importantly, the front seven's only given up around 156 rushing yards to opposing offenses. but I think it's the physicality of Washington. They have the experience in the secondary that matches up very well against Harry and those wide receivers. It's back-to-back road games for Arizona State. I think the better head coach is Chris Peterson. I was not impressed with Herm Edwards in terms of second half adjustments. And more importantly, I think Arizona State's defense will be fatigued in this matchup. Look for Gaskins to have a big day. I know Jake Browning in Washington has not stepped up in big ball games in terms of consistency. You look at Browning, 4 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, made some bad plays in terms of turning the football over. A couple of key flags allowed Washington to maintain drives. To me, it doesn't matter, though. It does come down to the interior line play. I think Washington is the superior team. And more importantly, I think Arizona State could be tired in this matchup on the road. I know they've had great success in recent years over the Huskies, but this is a revenge spot, and I think Washington dominates in this ballgame 48-20. Washington gets the clear-cut 4-touchdown win over the Sun Devils this coming weekend. It's a conference game as well. Stay with me all season long at GoForThe2.com. If you want more picks for Saturday's action, you can follow the radio and TV show on Fantasy Sports Television and Radio Network, channel 238 in the Optimum Cablevision area, or go to fntsy.com/radio, or YouTube, go to FNTSY channel, College Football Today. Show starts from 10 to 1 p.m. streaming on YouTube each and every Saturday. Love talking about college football. Have a great weekend, everyone.